Cassia, here we are. The Supreme Court has officially overturned Roe v. Wade. We knew it was coming. We've known for months. I'm still really pissed. I am still so full of rage and exhausted and overwhelmed. How are you feeling?
And terrified. I feel terrified. Like, it just feels like this is the first of some very, very scary realities for our country.
Yeah, we're living in a time where it feels very much like the pendulum of extremism is swinging about, and it's going really in the wrong direction. And we're seeing the result of that frankly, in the form of numerous Supreme Court decisions that have come down the pike just in the last week or so. And we will be experiencing the repercussions of this for some time to come. And frankly, having had notice about this did not help at all.
Not even a little bit. I think it was, a beloved friend and colleague of ours who we trust dearly reflected earlier today that it was probably the first time that most of us have lived through seeing a right taken away. We've all lived fighting for many rights and generations before us, fighting for all of these rights. But I can't think of another example that we have personally lived through where we've had access to something, where we've had that freedom, that right, and it's been revoked. And that's unnerving and scary, and it feels a little bit like the ground is, crumbling beneath your feet.
Yeah. And so we've all been overwhelmed and inundated with, social media and news and conversations, hopefully in our personal networks, about the repercussions of this and what it's going to mean potentially for years and years to come. So today we decided to throw it back to actually our very first episode of Breaking Glass, which we released in November of 2020 with Alva Smith, who is a renowned civil rights activist in Ireland and was on the forefront of overturning one of the strictest bans on abortion around the world, which was in Ireland in 2018. It's an incredible story. It's frankly really heartwarming. She also takes us through a lot of personal ups and downs that she experienced as a woman in Ireland, as a queer woman in Ireland, as a civil rights and human rights activist in Ireland. But it has a happy ending, and we really need a happy ending.
It's like a glimmer of hope that we need right now. And for Ireland to do it, a really Catholic country, I think one that very few people expected to see that take place in is inspiring. And so I think Alva's story is one that a lot of people can relate to. It's one that a lot of people can hopefully find hope from right now. It's certainly one that's never been more relevant. And I think the last thing we want to do is show up in your feeds with any sort of distraction. These are real times and they're hard times, and we want to keep talking about the issue. And this is the best way that we know how to offer everyone hope.
So let this be a balm in a very difficult time, that there is a glimmer of hope in the future, that we will not just rest on our laurels. We will fight this. We have begun. We will continue. And in the meantime, enjoy a story that has a happy ending for once. We all need that. Take a listen. Welcome. Thank you so much, Alva, for joining us all the way in Dublin. We really feel honored to have you as part of what we feel is a very important and timely conversation on what is happening with women's reproductive rights, specifically in Ireland, how that is also translating to the conversation around the world, and even a broader discussion around women's empowerment, feminism, and a personal discussion on your journey through that over nearly 40 years of activism. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for asking me. It really is a delight and also a privilege to be able to have this kind of conversation.
Now, Alva, as I understand it, you were born to middle-class parents in Dublin and actually trace some of your earliest exposure to feminist thinking all the way back to your Catholic grade school. Tell us more about that.
Well, it was absolutely typical for girls in Ireland at the time. But they were very interesting religious order who had come to Ireland from England, and they very much encouraged us as young girls, just growing up, to think in terms of having a working life, even a career. I didn't really have that word career in my vocabulary, I think, at that time, but to think in terms of a job and work being important. And that was very unusual for middle class girls in Ireland at that time. So I consider myself really very fortunate to have these progressive, forward looking women who were educating me. So I grew up thinking, oh, I'll be able to go to university. And in fact, I was the first girl in my very large extended family. I was the first girl to go to university in that family. And I did, and I studied English and French, which seemed to be a good choice for a girl, and didn't really think very much about what the future might hold for me. But when I qualified, I was actually offered a job in the university, in University College Dublin, in the Department of French. And of course, I took it. I didn't think, oh, this is the beginning of an academic career. It was quite simply a job. It seemed interesting. It was going to give me it was going to give me wages, and I thought, yes, I'll go for this. And that was actually how an academic career of 40 years started, without any great planning or thought. Quite quickly, as a young woman in this very Catholic country, I began to run into difficulties.
Okay, so here you are, a middle class girl in Ireland. You come up through Catholic schools, and then you're the first in your family to graduate university. That would have been an impressive story in and of itself. But from here, you managed to launch an amazing career in women's rights, mostly through academia and activism. I'm curious, what was some of your earliest exposure to these issues? When did you start to feel the pushback and the limitation that the system was placing upon women in Ireland?
I was growing up in a society where there was no contraception, no divorce. The question of abortion was completely, on another planet, and where nobody really talked about our sexual or bodily lives. I mean, I'm lesbian now, but at that time I had never, to my knowledge, I didn't even know the words gay and lesbian, never mind trans and so on. These were not part of my thinking. They weren't part of my world. They weren't part of anybody's world here. So it was really very difficult. And I had obviously, friends, pals, mates, and they said to me, what you need to do about the contraception is you need to go to your family doctor and to say that your menstrual cycle is very irregular and that you think you probably need the pill. So I went to my family doctor and said precisely this. I said, well, you didn't use the term menstrual cycle. I just said, my periods are a bit irregular. And he then immediately said, oh, I think you need to go on the pill. And that was how I got a prescription for the pill. And in retrospect, it's very clear to me that there was a complicity there, that doctors knew very well what young women and indeed older women, married women, were doing. And I think I really reached a point where I began to have some glimmers of understanding about my life and the kinds of contradictions that it contained. But as soon as I got married, even the day I was getting married, I knew that this was not me. It really didn't feel right at all. And very, very soon after my marriage, within a few weeks, I became very ill. And it was at that point that the doctors said I was having a breakdown, and that the reason I was having a breakdown was because I was suffering very acutely from anorexia nervosa, which was barely diagnosed in Ireland in those days. And that was obviously a huge shock for me, and an even bigger shock, I think, in some ways for my family and also for my then husband, because I went into a psychiatric hospital